Welcome to Pandemic Parenting. I hope everyone had a nice, relaxing New Year break. I know I certainly did. I took time off and just relaxed, disconnected. I got to hang out with my nephew and ride the Polar Express, so that was super fun. But now it's 2022, ready to get back into it, and I got a whole bunch of new guests for you, and it's going to be amazing. So, as always, if you'd like to contact me personally, you can email me at greg@thinkandEvolve.academy, or you can just visit me at thinkandEvolve.academy. All my socials and stuff are up there. So if you have any comments, questions, concerns, please hit me up. Today we got a great guest, Chris Tompkins, who is the author of Raising LGBTQ Allies. And Chris is going to come on today and share with parents how they can have those potentially difficult conversations with their kids. And Chris is gay, so his experience and context is going to be through that lens. But what Chris is going to share is really applicable to any challenging conversation you may need to have with your kids. Because we all know there's those little problems, those little things that may be uncomfortable to talk about, and you put it aside and you sweep it under the bed, which is, Chris is going to talk about that. You sweep it under the bed, and then the dragon grows bigger and bigger and bigger until it becomes a major problem, and it could actually cause a rift between you and your kids. And we want to avoid that, obviously. So Chris is going to share some of his own experiences and his experiences working in social emotional learning, and teach parents how they can have those challenging conversations with their kids to close that gap before it becomes super wide and out of hand. So, super happy to be back. Let's dive right into it. Chris Tompkins.
Welcome to Pandemic Parenting. I am your host, Greg Freeberry, and I'm here with Chris Tompkins. And he is the author of Raising LBGTQ Allies, and he does a lot of work with social emotional learning, and it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So, I like to start off the show just by asking you just like a few random personal questions, just to kind of put you at ease and let everyone get to know you a little bit, if that's cool with you.
Yeah.
So, what's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Oh my gosh. Something with cookie dough.
Cookie dough? All right, that's not saying, like, I used to get in trouble with my parents all the time because, like, they buy the cookie dough ice cream and then I just, like, eat the cookie dough out of it and, like, leave the rest of the ice cream. If you could, like, teleport to another time period, either in the future or in the past, where would you go?
That's a good question. Oh my gosh. I'd probably go like way back in time, like back in, where like way far back, we're still kind of discovering lands. So we're not aware of like other continents. I think
Okay. A little mystery.
Yeah. Like discovery.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Who would be your biggest role model?
That's a good question. I think a role model that I have right now is my friend Tete, who lives in Mexico.
Okay.
Yeah, he just moved there for his organization.
Okay, cool.
So he's.
Why is he your role model? Like, what
just the action that he takes and just kind of following his heart and going against the grain.
All right, I like that.
Like what?
I'm big on that too.
Yeah, like doing something that's totally what people would like. If he were to tell you what he was doing, everyone that he would talk to would say, that sounds like a horrible idea.
Yeah.
But he's doing it, and I've just seen the growth that he's experienced, and it's just kind of unfolding really sweetly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I like when I told my mom like that I was gonna quit my cushy engineering job and move to LA without any real plan of like what to do next. Obviously, she was like freaking out, and everyone's telling me, "Oh, that's a terrible idea." But like in my heart, I kind of knew that it was right, and just living life on your own terms is just really important. So I love that answer.
Yeah.
And then let's see, do you have like a favorite book or movie or something that you've seen recently that you got a lot out of?
My favorite book is The Alchemist.
Oh, mine too.
Really?
Yeah, I love that book.
I love that book so much, and I I've talked about that book a lot this week.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I could live inside that book.
Yeah.
I could live inside the story.
I love you say, like, if you truly want something, the universe just conspires to support you, right?
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into it. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about was, I saw in your biography that you used to be like a bartender, and then now you got into like social emotional learning, and I saw your TED Talk, and you've become kind of a public speaker in that regard. So could you just share a little bit about your journey and how you went from there to here?
Yeah. It's been a long journey. I think that for me, it all kind of started with what I bartended for 11 years here in Los Angeles at a really big popular bar, and so kind of what I was experiencing, just what I was observing in my own life, and being gay myself, and kind of coming out of the closet and moving to Los Angeles to do a lot of advocacy work, and so I was kind of experiencing and seeing things that maybe not everyone was talking about, with regard to like unhealed trauma and religious trauma and shame and internalized homophobia and substance use and all of those kinds of things. And so my nephew back in 2015 had asked me a question at a family function that really is kind of the impetus for how I gave my TEDx talk, and then eventually what led to me writing a book. But I had a fear of public speaking. So I don't know if you've heard of Toastmasters, but
I have.
Okay.
Yeah, I've gone to a couple meetings, but I haven't like really followed through all the way.
Okay. So Toastmasters, for those of you that don't know, it's a public speaking. You practice public speaking, and so basically you give 10 speeches to become a competent communicator.
Okay.
So it's like a button that you get. That it's like your seal of approval.
Gotcha.
And so I didn't realize it, but you have to write a speech before you give one.
Okay. Interesting.
Which, I mean, makes sense, but I didn't think about that, when I signed up. I was just like dedicated to, wanting to practice public speaking.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening was I had a lot of things that I wanted to say. And so I was writing all of these speeches that kind of turned into conversations that I was wanting to have, with people. And so there's a book. So that kind of led me to, there's a book, speaking of another book, it's like my second favorite book. It's called You Can Heal Your Life.
Okay, I haven't heard of that one, but I'll have to check
Louise
it out.
Hay. And I was at a library waiting for a friend to go to an event, and I was just browsing the self-help section, which I typically I'm drawn to, that area.
Yeah, same.
And there was this book that seemed really old, it looked used, and it seemed outdated, kind of just the coloring. And I picked it up off the shelf, and I was flipping through it, and I was, whoa, this is stuff that I had never heard before. And the name kind of kept, You Can Heal Your Life. What does that mean? Does my life need to be healed?
Yeah.
And there was a big kind of colorful heart. And so I was flipping through, and I turned to the very, towards the end of the book, and it had a section on gay men specifically. The book wasn't about or for gay men, but it just seemed as if there was this particular few paragraphs that were kind of speaking to gay men.
Okay.
And she was talking about things that seemed really relevant to my experience, like I said, working at a gay bar.
Yeah.
Bartending. And so, but the book seemed old. So I was like, what? That doesn't make sense, because the book seems old, but I feel like the content is still really relevant to me and applicable to my life. So I flipped to the front of the book to see when the date of the book was, and it said 1984.
Wow.
And I literally had, I don't know if you've ever had one of those experiences where you, there's this rush of you just feel it in your body,
oh yeah,
it just makes complete sense. And I was like, oh my gosh, all the things that I had intuitively felt in my experience, bartending, and what I was observing and kind of seeing and experiencing in my own life. And I was like, if there's a way that I can get this, because the information was about self-love. The book was about self-love and how to heal your life, meaning your thoughts, and uncovering your negative thinking and how to love yourself. And so I was like, if I could get this information to young people at a young age, then I could prevent, not me, but we could prevent, because I've been doing a lot of advocacy work.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is another type of advocacy work that I could do to help young people, young LGBTQ people, learn how to love themselves. And then that would prevent some of the things that I was experiencing working at a bar. So fast forward, the author of the book, Louise Hay, she was retired. The book, like I said, was from the 80s, but her predecessors had a training that they would teach people how to be a Heal Your Life teacher based on the principles of the book.
Okay.
So I did that training, and then fast forward, someone else who had discovered Louise Hay's book, a woman by the name of Tilly, who, for those of you, the clothing store, Tilly's.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm familiar with that, yeah.
Yeah, so she's an actual person.
Okay.
And so she started Tilly's Life Center, which is based on the principles of the Louise Hay Heal Your Life book.
Wow.
It's not just the only thing, but it's
a little chain there.
It's yeah. And so that's kind of how the universe, going back to The Alchemist, is when you say when you say yes to your life, it's like things happen that you can't really even like predict or plan, but it just comes together. And so I got a call from someone from this Heal Your Life program that was looking for Heal Your Life teachers that could help teach this new program that was based on, it was social emotional learning with the principles of self-love and kind of this Louise Hay Heal Your Life philosophy.
Amazing.
So that's how I got started with the social emotional learning, and I've been doing that for the past 6 years.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
That your story really struck a chord with me, because I was the exact same way. Like I kind of went through my life, and I got to this point where I was like, oh, this isn't really what I want to do. And then I went on this like journey of self-discovery and self-love, and I went to all these like meditation and journaling and like all these different programs, and then I was like, well, how cool would it be if someone had given this to me when I was a teenager or something, and then I already had the tools, and then like that I made that my mission. So we're kind of like sailors in the same boat in a lot of ways. And I think it's really incredible that it's like, you know, this book you said was from 1984. It's like this information is out there, right? And it's just about getting it into the hands of the right people and putting it in front of people. Right. Like the information is there. We just have to get it in front of people.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
So, I love that. I love your mission, and that's a really cool journey.
Thank you.
All right, I want to try a little new segment on the show called Deep Thoughts with Greg. And since Chris already mentioned it, The Alchemist, we'll talk about The Alchemist. I want to share a quote with you from The Alchemist, which is a rather whimsical book. And then I want to share another quote with you from a much more somber book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And if you don't know about that book, Viktor Frankl is a Holocaust survivor. So his book is all about his experiences in the concentration camps and how people were able to survive that ordeal. So the first quote from The Alchemist is, "And when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it." And what this means is basically, if you truly desire something deep down, you'll start noticing these little coincidences or happy accidents where it seems like things are just happening to push you towards your desire, like making it happen. Okay, so that's kind of this feminine energy of just creation and being open. And then the other side of this coin is this other quote from Viktor Frankl that I find very powerful as well. And what he said is, "It did not really matter what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us. We needed to stop asking about the meaning of life and instead to think of ourselves as those who were being questioned by life, daily and hourly. Our answer must consist not in talk and meditation, but in right action and in right conduct. Life ultimately means taking the responsibility to find the right answer to its problems and to fulfill the tasks which it constantly sets for each individual." Okay, so this is the other side of the coin. So he's saying, stop asking like, what do I want from life? Instead, start asking, what does life want from me? Okay, so it's similar to that John F. Kennedy quote as well. And the idea is, you don't just sit around and meditate and question and talk. It's all about doing right action and right conduct. So I think if you combine these two, okay, Frankl's quote and the quote from Paulo Coelho, who wrote The Alchemist. So you stay open to the possibilities. You figure out what you want, but it's not really what you want. It's what does life want from you? What does life want from you? In Viktor Frankl's case, it was surviving the Holocaust, surviving the concentration camp. So he was in dire circumstances. But maybe your life isn't asking that dire of thing from you. But what you'll notice is if you start taking right action and right conduct and moving towards whatever life is asking from you, then the universe will conspire to help you. So that's what I truly believe. And that's something to think about. Right action, right conduct towards your desire, towards your wish, which is really what does life want from you. And you'll notice how the universe starts to support you and pushes you towards that desire and brings it into your life. So that is a deep thought for you today. Back to Chris and his amazing information on social emotional learning and having those difficult conversations. So let's get into it.
So why don't you tell me a little bit more about what you do now and why you're so passionate about it?
Yeah. So what I do now is, so I had a book that was released, and so that whole journey that I just described over the course of 6 years was basically like information gathering.
Okay.
Although I was teaching, I was the student for those 6 years.
Yeah, of course.
Meaning that, because I worked the program, the Tilly's Life Center, the social emotional learning program, I brought to Los Angeles at the LGBT Center, Central Juvenile Hall, which is downtown Los Angeles. So a lot of the programs that I was helping to get the program into had LGBTQ youth.
Okay.
So there was like a specific kind of focus for me. That was kind of my heart space, just because of my own experience growing up, being gay, having a religious trauma, that's kind of part of my background story.
Same.
And then through my life, kind of rediscovering my relationship with a higher power that is supportive and that loves me. That was part of my self-love journey, was learning how to love myself, meant that I learned how to allow, the universe, support from the universe, and redeveloping a relationship with my higher power. And so that's really kind of what led me to want to share this kind of work, and like you said, the information, it's there.
Yeah.
It's just kind of helping to get it out there, to disseminate it.
Yeah.
And through that process, I learned so much myself. And so that really was what kind of helped inspire me to then give the TEDx talk, which eventually turned into a book that I wrote that came out right after the pandemic. It was originally supposed to come out in 2020, and then because of the pandemic, it was postponed until 2021. But it really, I believe that, things happen and really the perfect time and space order. And so what really with the book has facilitated is conversations that a lot of parents and families and caregivers are having during the pandemic, because I feel like just the shift in consciousness on the planet, we've had to, as a society, look at things that we've not wanted to look at in a really long time.
Totally.
And it doesn't mean that they haven't been there. It's just we haven't been looking. And so a lot of the times when I teach, when I'm working with young people, I invite them to consider kind of the analogy that I use is like, if your parents asked you to go clean your room, and they said, okay, you have until XYZ time to clean your room. Before we go, we have to run and go to the dinner or something. And so you cleaned your room, you dust off the shelves, you picked up everything, and then it's almost time for your parents to come check, and you realize you didn't clean under the bed. And underneath the bed, that's where all the dirty dishes from late night snacks, and there's dust, and there's all this stuff underneath the bed. And then, but your parents come in, they open the door, oh my gosh, your room is clean, you did such a great job, but that you didn't get underneath the bed. So can you technically still say that you have a clean room?
That's a good question.
And so I raise that question to my classes when I teach, and so it creates a dialogue around what's underneath the bed. And I feel like that's kind of what's been happening over the past few years, is now we're cleaning underneath the bed.
Okay.
It's like the darker, the dirtier stuff, and it takes a little effort. We have to get on our knees, we have to maybe pull the bed out. It's like more, it's not as easy, because to dust off the shelf or to pick up laundry that you see, you have to actually make it a concerted effort to get underneath the bed.
That is true.
And so I feel like for my book, as an example, it's really helping parents and families and caregivers have conversations, like similar to what you said about the information has been out there. It's just now we're being invited to really look at it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm doing right now, is to really help facilitate a lot of those conversations.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
And now that we're in this pandemic time, how have you seen that impacting the people you work with, the kids, the families, and the parents, especially when you're presenting this information? Are people cleaning under the bed? I guess?
Yeah, I do. I think that, one of the things I write about in my book is that oftentimes when you have like a pendulum swinging, and you have a pendulum that swings really far this way, that we're making a lot of progress, the momentum is that the pendulum swings the other way. So I feel like right now we're in this real kind of interesting space, because a lot of conversations we're swinging this way, and we're having a lot of progress, and we're making a lot of movement, and people's minds and hearts are opening in ways that they haven't in a long time. And there's a lot of the pendulum is also swinging the other way, where there's a lot of kind of maybe resistance, like old paradigms and old systems.
Sure.
To break those down, we can white knuckle and try and keep them in place.
Right.
Even though they don't work, we're still trying to hold them in place. And so I feel like the conversations I've had, a lot of families are really being invited to look and have conversations with their kids. And one of my big messages with my book, and when I talk to families, it's really, really simple. I mean, even though my book's like 250 pages and 70,000 words.
Yeah.
It's really simple. It's talk to your kids. Like all of that is,
that's the simple thing.
That's
right?
the simple.
Just
That's the elevator, pitch is,
right.
Talk to your kids. In order to do that, though, like I really truly believe that we can only take others as far as we've gone ourselves. And so as a teacher, as a mentor, as an advocate, as a gay man, as an uncle, as a teacher, as a parent, as a caregiver, we can only take others as far as we've gone ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's talk to your kids, and it's do the work yourself.
Yes.
So that you can create that space to be able to facilitate and hold space for those conversations.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's so important to just have those conversations. And we before the interview, we were kind of talking about how a lot of those conversations, especially around sexuality during the pandemic, have been put on the back burner. So do you have any advice for parents that how they can kind of approach their kids?
Yeah.
If they maybe have suspicions that they might be gay or bisexual or anything like that, because it can be really uncomfortable, especially for parents that maybe are like gripping to those older paradigms.
Sure. Yeah. That's a great question. And I think even like one of the things I write about in my book is the importance of language and words. And one of the things I don't want to do with my book is I find that in my own life, whenever I'm giving a presentation or even talking to people, sometimes because we want to say the right thing, that we sometimes don't say anything at all, or we prevent ourselves from saying something. So like, instead of like suspicion that our child is LGBTQ, because the word suspicion kind of seems like suspicious, like that.
Yeah, there's kind of a negative connotation.
Yeah. So curiosity.
That's better, yeah.
So having curiosity, and I think that in order to do that, we have to really, and one of the things I write about in my book too is like, it's not just about having conversations with kids and talking to our kids, which for sure that's the big piece. It's the addressing things like heteronormativity. And that's doing the work ourselves so that we can identify ways that we've been helping to keep systems. So like automatically just assuming our children are straight or cisgender, that is an example of our kids have to make the extra effort to not be that in our eyes. And so even like a young infant, like parents are just kind of unconsciously, it's not that they're bad or they want to love their child.
Yeah, totally.
It's just kind of considering that their child's identity may not be the way that they're like seen.
Yeah.
And so just kind of having that consciousness is a way for the child to feel seen and to have the parent caregiver to have the glimmer in their eye, regardless of what the child becomes.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, thank you for correcting my language, because I was just even thinking while you were saying that, like, as like a heterosexual, cisgender, white male, I'm living in this world of heteronormativity, and sometimes it's like, it just doesn't even occur to me.
Totally.
And
totally.
then it's helpful to like have someone from another perspective point out,
like,
hey, maybe you could change your language here.
Yeah. And I say that because I am also in the same place that you're in, meaning that one of the things with my book is, so my book's called Raising LGBTQ Allies, and the subtitle is A Parent's Guide to Changing the Messages from the Playground. And the messages from the playground are the unconscious beliefs that we all have.
Right. They all start like that.
Yeah. So it's not that you're like, this separate person from me. Like, I played on the same playground. I developed the same messages. I have the heteronormativity. Just because I'm a gay man doesn't mean that I don't have those unconscious biases myself. And so for me as an uncle, or even if I'm a parent, an LGBTQ parent, I still have a role to play in uncovering my messages from the playground.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And and if you haven't seen Chris's TED Talk yet, definitely go check it out. It's really great because he talks about it in there as well.
So, our words create our reality. 100%. And so you just saw there that Chris and I had a cool moment where when I was asking him the question, I used the word suspicion or suspect. Like, if your parents suspect that their kids might be gay. And so it's subtle, but in that word suspect, there's this implied negative connotation that somehow gayness is bad, right? Because we only suspect things if behind the scenes there's something like nefarious going on, right? And that's one of those things is like, from my perspective, I wasn't trying to be malicious or anything like that, or imply that gayness is bad or homosexuality is bad. But in my language, my unconscious language, I send that message, right? So it's important to be corrected, for one. So I thank Chris for correcting my language on that one, changing it to curiosity, which is a much more neutral word. And I know some of you out there are like, oh, it's just like semantics. It's a small thing, right? But for me, I really believe that, like I said, words create our reality. So even if I'm using the words suspicion or suspect, even subconsciously, I'm building this idea that there's something to be suspicious about when we're talking about homosexuality. And so you want to be very careful with your words. And this is kind of the thing exactly that Chris and I were talking about. Like, where in your life are you subtly communicating something that you may not even realize you're communicating? Something that might be unconscious. So take a moment to like slow down and try and be aware of places where maybe you're communicating something to your children, your kids, and you don't even realize you're doing it. Okay? And so it's important to be aware of those things so that we can like change our language, change our reality. Because when we change our words, change our language, we change our realities. And you help create this reality for your kids where maybe instead of them thinking that they're being suspected of being gay, or that they think that that's wrong or inappropriate, you can create a reality for them where being gay is fine. It's not a big deal. It's normal. Just like being heterosexual is normal. So look for those areas where you are using words or communication that might imply something that you may not necessarily want to imply. All right, so I just had to interject in there because I think that was like a pretty cool moment, because it was like literally happening real time what Chris was talking about in the words that were coming out of my mouth. So let's get back to the interview and more words of wisdom from Chris.
Well, how can parents kind of be careful about, because you talk a lot about how it's not so much what we say to our kids, but just how we behave, and then kids are just picking up, they're just taking cues from their parents.
Yeah.
So do you have any suggestions for parents around that just being more careful about like what they're projecting.
It's tricky, because the thing of it is that parenting, having children, is like the most difficult job.
Right. I know.
So I got to give, all the parents and caregivers out there, props to all the parents and caregivers, because
that's why I do this show, because I know how freaking
it is not easy. And even parents of my own, I have siblings that have children, and I am grateful to be an uncle. And I also know, one of the things I also talk about, when I'm talking to parents and caregivers and teachers, is that I was a kid. Mm-hmm. So I kind of know, like, the journey of self-love. What that really did for me was help me to connect more with my younger self, like the younger Chris that for so long I disconnected from because of the shame and guilt and just negative feelings I had about my identity. So for me, the ability to learn how to love myself has given me the opportunity to, like, almost reparent and kind of get into touch with that little kid part of myself, and to understand what his needs were. Mm-hmm. And so what I share is from a space of knowing what it's like to be missed as a child. And so and so what parents can do is that it's not about, and this is one of the things I say in the book too, is like, it's not about focusing on getting it right. Because that's still kind of the white knuckling. Like, I want to be perfect. I want to get it right. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Like, oh no, what if I say the wrong thing? It's about stay focused on keeping open. And I also invite parents to consider, I say this all the time, but it's where whenever there's a rupture, and there are going to be ruptures. That's just part of human relationships.
Yeah, right, of course.
But we have the opportunity to make a repair. And so what often happens is there's a rupture, and then we don't make the repair. And that's where it creates like a wound, and that wound has scar tissue that it heals, but the scar tissue later on in life maybe starts to cause distress in our bodies, or how we move. And so the repair is the ability to kind of prevent scar tissue. So it's actually like an authentic healing. And then it's in the repair that we grow closer. So like as a parent or caregiver, or me as an uncle, like even with my nieces and nephews, like I'm gonna make ruptures, but it's my ability to talk, and this is the talk to your kids. It's like, gosh, I got it wrong, or this is really confusing for me, and I just want to be supportive, and so it's just being able to talk to your kids and not try and be perfect, because that doesn't exist.
Yeah. I have that kind of perfectionism in myself too. A lot of times I'm like, oh, well, I don't want to say something if I'm going to like look foolish or dumb or wrong or something like that. But then I end up saying nothing at all. Yeah. And then it's not only depriving myself of growth, but it's depriving like that energetic exchange between two people, and doesn't give me and that other person a chance to grow together. Right. So, yeah. I love the idea of just trying to be open and not worrying about getting it right, but just genuinely just trying to communicate and bond with people. Yeah. Especially kids.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, you were a kid. Everyone, we're all kids, at one time, and we still have that part of ourselves that I feel like I've heard it said before, but like we're little kids in adult bodies, and so it's like what I say too, and what I experienced teaching, for 6 years, is like kids are truth detectors.
Oh yeah, they know.
They know. They can smell, and so even if you're like clumsy, what they'll smell is your authenticity, your desire to connect. That's what they'll smell, and that's what that's what you're actually teaching to them. I believe that we're all teachers. I say this in the book, that we teach through our demonstration. So parents, caregivers, we get to teach through our demonstration.
Totally.
All right, so I wanted to take a moment to talk about perfectionism. And perfectionism is one of those subtly little vicious things, because on the outside, it sounds like perfectionism might be a good thing. Like, oh, I want to make it perfect. But like Chris just said, there's no such thing as perfect, right? So what ends up happening is we get in this circle of, well, I can make it a little better, I can make it a little better, I can make it a little better. And then it never actually gets done, because there's always improvements to be made. And so this shows up in my life, for example, like when I wanted to make this show, right? I had no idea how to interview people or edit videos, or I had to like learn YouTube and all like writing descriptions and hashtags and like so. For a very long time, my perfectionism, I wanted to be good. I wanted to look crisp and clean and like people love it and it just like looks well produced. And for years, it kept me from actually producing a show like this. But I finally gave up my perfectionism and I said, you know what? Instead of just like making it look good, trying to make it look like the best, I just need to get the information out there. I just need to get out there, try and practice, and I'll get better. And hopefully I've gotten better over the past like 3 months. I think so. And I'll continue to get better. I'll continue to improve. And that's how we can build towards making a better product. So this applies to me in that regard, but it also can apply to like what Chris is talking about and just simply having conversations even with strangers. Like I'm very shy out in public. I'm introverted. Like having conversations with strangers is a practice. And when we're talking about having conversations with your kids, uncomfortable conversations, yeah, it might get awkward, and that's okay. It might be weird and uncomfortable, but having that conversation, just like Chris was saying, is kids can detect underneath the awkwardness and uncomfortableness that, hey, you're just trying to be a genuine parent to your kids. You're just trying to connect to them and relate to them. They can sense that. They can feel that. And so no matter how it comes out of your mouth or whatever, sure, there might be some awkward missteps, and then they'll correct you and you'll correct them. And it's kind of like a little dance. It's a conversation. That's what conversations are all about. So the point is just to do it. And the more uncomfortable conversations you're willing to have, the better you will get at them. So yeah, this idea of like, it has to be perfect, or, I want to talk to my kid about that, but I might say something weird, or it might come off strange, and that's okay. Just be willing to make a fool of yourself, or, and that's what I try and do every day. And the crazy thing is like, this is how life works, right? There's paradoxes, right? The more I'm willing to make a fool of myself, the more of a master I become at whatever it is I'm trying to do. So just keep that in mind. Like the more you're willing to just put yourself out there and try and make mistakes and fail, the better you'll become at it. So hopefully the more uncomfortable, awkward conversations you have with your kids, the better you'll get at them. And then when it's down the road, when there's more uncomfortable conversations to be had, which there always are, and you can go in and you can be better at it. And you can heal those rifts that Chris was talking about before they become festering wounds. Okay, we can heal and bond with each other. You can bond with your family and your kids in a much deeper way than letting something fester behind the scenes and cause resentment. So we're about to go into the last little bit of Chris's interview here. And he'll be offering some good resources and other ideas and websites and even his own stuff for potentially going deeper into this topic. So definitely want to stick around for that, because he offers and shares a lot of really amazing stuff, including his book. So check that out.
Yeah, and that just rang another bell. There's also something called, I think you mentioned, like benign neglect, yes. Right? Where, through not demonstrating something, maybe we're actually kind of cultivating something maybe we don't want to cultivate.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about that and how to counteract that as well.
Yeah. So benign neglect, I write about this, I spoke about it in my TEDx talk, but It was a policy, just briefly, it was a policy proposed in 1969 by Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who at the time was President Nixon's urban affairs advisor. And so during the civil rights movement, he wrote a memo, controversial memo, and sent it to the president and said, hey, let's apply benign neglect to this issue of race. And basically it was a way of saying, let's turn our heads and just let's not deal with it. And so what that did, and what a lot of people have said, is that policy, like that kind of a benign neglect, just not looking at it, is what has manifested. It's kind of like that dust underneath the bed, that dirty bed underneath,
Right.
the unclean underneath the bed. Well, if you don't take those dishes out, you have a late night snack, and it's going to start developing mold and fungus that years down the road, that could like turn into something unhealthy that you're breathing. So that's kind of the same thing with regard to benign neglect and racism in the United States and where we're at today.
Yeah.
And so benign neglect, as it applies to anything in our life, is basically where you're turning your head away from something that you deem like, I'd rather not talk about this, so I'm just going to ignore it.
Right.
But what that does though is that creates more harm than good, because then, you know, it creates the, like I said, the dirt, and it starts to grow and become bigger and bigger.
Totally. And it's interesting because, you know, maybe even as parents, if you don't want to have a particular conversation, you're like, oh, well, I just won't look at it, or anything in your own life. Like, it seems like it's not a big deal at the time, right? But as you're saying, this benign neglect could have major impacts potentially on racism, or it could, like, if you like have a kid that's LGBTQ and you like don't want to talk to them about it, could have major implications online, even if at the moment it doesn't seem like a big deal to neglect it. So it is important that you kind of nip it in the bud.
Yeah, exactly. And that requires kind of going back, is that, you know, we can only take others as far as we've gone ourselves. So what that means is that I have to do the work to uncover my blind spots, to be able to help hold a space for something that I'm wanting to turn my head away from or apply benign neglect, but I'm actually being invited to address it. And so how that could apply to children and families is like, you know, kids are developing naturally, their bodies, their minds, and they're having questions.
Yeah.
And a lot of parents and caregivers, maybe they don't want to talk about certain things because they don't think they're old enough. And the thing of it is that if they're having questions and they're having curiosity, they're old enough. And so what this really can do is that it can prevent shame from being a part of a child's naturally developing experience, whether or not they're LGBTQ. Because just because you're LGBTQ doesn't mean that, or just because you're not LGBTQ doesn't mean that you don't develop shame about your identity. And so having conversations and not doing benign neglect is a way to prevent the shame.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely had to go through that myself and kind of just work on learn how to love myself through the shame and guilt, and like a lot of people carry that around. And I think it's interesting too, like as a tutor, I get to work with kids a lot, and sometimes it's interesting what they'll actually share with me that maybe they wouldn't share with their parents. And you know, sometimes my policy is always just to be as honest as I can, because I think if they ask me some sort of question and then I'm like, ooh, I shouldn't talk about that, that's telling them that there's like maybe some shame or some guilt around that. And so if it's like inappropriate, I'll redirect them to their parents. But if I feel like comfortable answering the question, I try and just be very open and honest, because I don't want to just shut them down.
Yeah, that's great. That's and that's teaching them. So like that's a perfect example.
Yeah. So, well, this has been great, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you'd like to suggest for parents around LGBTQ allyship or anything like that? Any suggestions for families?
Yeah, my book, it came out, no pun intended, but it was released in about 6 months ago, so it's still relatively new, and it's available and wherever books are sold.
There you go.
Yeah, shameless plug. And yeah, there are many resources, and I always invite parents and caregivers and families and anyone who works with kids, is that there are so many resources. And so the message really too is that you don't have to do this alone.
Okay.
And you don't have to have all the answers.
Yeah. Is there any like apps or websites or anything like that you would recommend?
PFLAG is a wonderful organization, and I love PFLAG. I'm super involved with PFLAG myself, and they're all over the country, so you don't have to be in a specific, like sometimes organizations are like location specific, but
Right.
PFLAG is a really wonderful organization because no matter where you are in the country, they have support groups. And now virtually you can go, I mean, you don't even have to be in a specific town to go to a meeting. But they have meetings all the time for parents, for families, people who have questions. They're super supportive. There are other organizations like the Trevor Project. That's more for, it's like a youth line. So if a youth is having trouble coming out or have questions about their identity and they don't have someone safe to talk to, that would be a great resource, is the Trevor Project. So those are the two kind of that off the top of my head that I give to everyone, because they're both ends of the spectrum.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting that sometimes people will be more comfortable sharing like some of the most personal things about themselves with like a stranger.
100%.
You know?
Yeah.
Instead of, because it's almost like there's distrust among the people that are in their lives.
Yeah.
So like being able to call someone like on the Trevor Project,
Yeah.
just there to listen.
Yes.
Can be really powerful.
Yeah. Because we also kind of sometimes get the vulnerability hangover. And so being able to share something with someone, a stranger, that's what we kind of do. Studies show that you'll share something so vulnerable with a stranger because chances are you won't have to see them again.
Right.
So that vulnerability hangover. So, a hotline is really great. Even PFLAG support groups, you could come and there's a group of people who will just listen and support you. Regardless of whether or not you're a parent, a kid, a young person, they have groups for gender and sexuality. So,
all right. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. And finally, if anyone wants to find you on the internet, your website, you have an Instagram, whatever you like to share.
Yeah. My website and Instagram so my website is aroadtriptolove.com, all one word, and it's my Instagram handle as well, aroadtriptolove.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. I feel like I learned a lot today, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
All right. Thank you. Until next time, this has been Pandemic Parenting.
Now it's time for the wrap up recap. So thanks to Chris once again for coming on the show. He shared some really great information and strategies for having those potentially challenging and uncomfortable conversations with your kids. And for taking that little bit of extra time when you're checking to see if the room's clean, to check under the bed for the dust bunnies and the dirty plates, because when you take that extra little bit of time, you make sure the room is entirely clean. When you take that little bit of extra time to have those uncomfortable conversations, you build strong, healthy relationships with your kids. And not just now, but you set a foundation for the entire future. Instead of ignoring the problem, it doesn't seem like a big deal, they'll figure it out, whatever, and potentially leaving a wound to fester and create a rift between you and your family. Just have that uncomfortable conversation now. Come closer together, you bond, and it's okay if it's not perfect. It's okay if it's uncomfortable. It's okay if it's awkward. The important thing is that you're doing it. You're getting in there and you're building those relationships, because kids can truly sense when you're being authentic and you just want to connect. So, that's a beautiful message. Chris also shared some amazing resources. Go check out his TED Talk. Check out his book, Raising LBGTQ Allies. And finally, I want to try something new on the channel today. So to reward my loyal viewers who watch the entire episode of Pandemic Parenting. I know it's a big commitment. It's almost an hour long. So that's time out of your day that could be spent doing something else. But instead you're here watching Pandemic Parenting. So, show my appreciation. Everyone that's seen this can use the coupon code LOYALVIEWER to get my test anxiety knockout course. So if you have kids that are struggling with tests, they can't seem to just get tests down, they have anxiety, they get really tied around tests, but they're like studying hard, they're preparing, they're trying their best, and otherwise they seem like they understand the material. Well, this might be the course for you. It's a 30-day course. It's just daily audios. Very simply, just listen to audios. And it's a daily audio of just visualization so that kids can come in to tests with a nice, relaxed, calm, confident mindset that will launch them into better grades. So If that sounds like something you might be interested in, that's my gift to you as a loyal viewer. So again, the coupon code is loyal viewer, and you can find Test Anxiety Knockout on my website under thinkandEvolve.academy, right there, or maybe it's right there. thinkandEvolve.academy, under courses, you can find Test Anxiety Knockout. So just throwing that out there. This is a new thing I'm trying. We'll see if how many people actually go through with it. It should be pretty interesting. I'm excited to see. All right. Well, that is another episode of Pandemic Parenting. We'll be back at you next week. So stay tuned for another episode of Pandemic Parenting. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I love you.